to the meteor shower last Friday night. And Seanie Morris joins us from the Midlands Astronomy Club. Seanie, good morning.
Good morning to you, Will.
You missed the shower, but Peter O'Sullivan is on the line from Killucan. Peter, you were in Clane, so tell us what you saw at the time.
How are you doing?
Hi, Peter.
What I saw, it was about Friday night, 11:05. I work outside again in the country, and most nights I notice planes circling to land in Dublin Airport to my north. And as I was looking that way, I saw this light, which looked like a plane. It was green and whitish light in colour, and it approached where I was, and it changed to an orange amber colour and broke up with a larger light in front and about 6 smaller orange trailing it, and it went over my head.
Sorry, Peter, the signal isn't the best. If you can move back to wherever you started the conversation. But I'm gathering at this point you figured that's not a plane, or did you think disaster was unfurling above your head?
Not really, no. I thought it was a plane or some kind of a Chinese lantern or something, Hello?
Well, Seanie, what did it transpire to be? What did Peter see?
Well, it turns out that it probably more than likely was a piece of space rock. There was some concern as to whether or not it was a piece of a spacecraft rather than space rock, as it was very reminiscent of what happened back in 2003 when the shuttle Columbia disintegrated upon re-entry over to the United States that time. It had a very characteristic look of shredding and burning up as it was falling through the atmosphere. It was falling very slow, which is not characteristic of any normal meteor or fireball that we see. But what was determined to show that it was space rock over spacecraft was the line of trajectory that it was travelling. Most spacecraft that we have in orbit go from in west to east direction, whereas this was going from east to west in the opposite direction. And it's just simple mechanics, really. When you go to launch a satellite, you launch it against the spin of the Earth in order to be able to help gain altitude, whereas most satellites follow this path. Even any kind of space debris that might have come from the spacecraft is still going to follow that trajectory. So even if this was something that had broken off and came through the atmosphere, it's unlikely it was the spacecraft or any piece of space junk that was up there.
Right, by virtue of it running the wrong direction.
That's pretty much it, by virtue of running the wrong direction. Very few nations on this planet that have ever launched satellites will use the opposite direction to everything else that moves around the Earth to gain altitude with their satellites.
So how sizable an object would this have been, Seanie?
Well, I've seen an awful lot of the videos myself, and it was also spotted in the United States, so that means it has crossed the Atlantic for the sighting on Friday night. Something of this size would look like it could have been anything from a football to a small desk in size. Now, given the fact that it broke up readily as it was burning through the atmosphere, it would indicate that only much smaller pieces may have survived, but we probably will never see those. It would have crashed into the ocean at this stage, because even as far north as Donegal it was seen, still travelling, heading over the ocean. So more than likely this would have made oceanfall rather than landfall.
OK, well, speaking of the United States, he is from there, although he wasn't watching there at the time. That's Tom O'Hara, who I presume was watching this meteor shower in Milltown Pass on Friday. Tom, good morning.
Good morning, Will. How are you? And how's Seanie?
Good, Tom. How are you?
Not too bad.
Can you add to the description, Tom, on what Peter had to say earlier? What did you see?
Okay, well, I did something I normally would never do and haven't done in years. I happened to be inside a pub, and I went outside for a cigarette. And as we were talking, I saw this huge white light passing over me, and like Seanie said, it looked like it was heading west.
Okay, just to qualify, how many pints had you had at this stage?
I'd only gone out.
Right. Okay.
I'm not much of a drinker. I actually, I thought it was a firework for when one that would say like a rocket that would shoot out and then have a good long trail. But it was extremely bright. A very white light, and then like that, it looked like it trailed off about maybe 6 or 7 pieces, and they began to look like to glow a different color, like towards the amber color. And just dissipated and disappeared.
And where did it disappear to? In what direction?
Good question. It looked like it was heading southwest from where I was standing. Westerly, southwesterly direction.
And Seanie, is there any way of working out where it might have landed? Would it have been in Ireland, or if it already had passed the Atlantic, could it have gone much further southwest?
Well, what is usually done to determine the trajectory of such objects like this is you take everyone's sighting wherever they are on the globe, and you ask them, theoretically, you just say, draw a line against the background stars as to how and where you saw it. And that method, triangulation is basically what you're using in order to determine a path where the area that it might have hit the ground would be so long by so many few miles wide, and often you would find out if the terrain would allow for such a search if it was to hit on land. The method that's used to try and find meteorites like this would often occur in desert areas or places like that where it's devoid of lakes, devoid of trees and stuff like that, and it makes scouring the ground much easier, particularly from a height like with helicopter, because these objects would appear black against the brown or sandy coloured terrain that it could have fallen on.
Right, so they'd be distinctive, whereas if you're trying to find them in regular terrain, it'll be much more difficult. Would they have made much of an impact mark?
No, not necessarily. These have fallen before. An object way back in the early 90s called the Peekskill meteorite, which fell in suburban New York, was only the size of a football. But the fireball event that people witnessed for it was similar to what we all saw. Well, not me personally, but everybody else saw on Friday night.
You weren't in New York when that happened, Tom, were you?
No.
I think that was back in 1993.
What year was that?
What year was it, Seanie?
I think it was 1993.
Oh, well, I would have been in New York, but the Peekskills are a good nearly 100 miles away, up further up north.
Ah, right, so you wouldn't have seen it. Or else you were in the pub again that night.
They actually fell on a young lady's Malibu car and missed the gas tank by a couple of inches when it hit her car.
Oh, gosh, she was lucky.
Yeah, she was very, very lucky. It was still warm to the touch, she said, as well. And there's a famous photograph of this old, is it a Ford Malibu?
Chevy.
Chevy Malibu. With the back right corner taken out of the car and the bumper lying on the ground.
I actually remember that picture.
Yeah.
I do actually remember that picture because if I'm not mistaken, it went through her house and then into her car.
Is that far? Wow.
God, double bad luck.
Yeah.
Although you could turn it into a tourist attraction. Rare. If she preserved it, people would come to see that, I imagine.
It's a piece of meteorite is actually about, 5 times more than an ounce of gold?
It depends on the meteorite too. The more iron and nickel that it has in it, which is very rare to get, is what adds its value. Whereas a meteorite that would be just ordinary rock or silicate would have less value than your ounce of gold, but it would still have value to it because it would be such a collectible, such a rare collectible.
But we talked to a guy on this programme, I think he was from Scotland, you might remember better than I, Seanie. He makes a career out of travelling around trying to find objects that have fallen from space because they're so valuable.
That's right. We were talking about that a couple of months back. He spent something close to £230,000 over his lifetime collecting and selling meteorites.
Yeah, but he probably gets his money back and then some.
That's true.
You had no compulsion to run after this one on Friday night, Tom? No, you were content to go back into the pub?
I went straight back in.
Well, thanks for the description. We're getting lots of calls about it. Lots of people seem to have seen it. But the question is, in what direction did it go and where did it land? And that's the big mystery. Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking our calls today. Seanie Morris from the Midlands Astronomy Club and Tom O'Hara, resident of Middletown Pass, originally from New York in the USA. And some interesting texts on 083 30 10 103 with varying descriptions. Somebody said it has a slight green hue in its trail. Well, if you saw it, let me know.